Discover over 100 episodes of Bartholomewtown on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts.
This is the Bartholomewtown Podcast.
I found out that around November-ish that there was a huge uptick nationally in the deportations amongst Cambodians. 279% between fiscal years 17. And ICE is very proud of that. They're touting that as something to be proud of.
Welcome in to another edition of the Bartholomewtown Podcast. I'm your host, Bill Bartholomew. On today's episode, I sit down with the Providence Journal's immigration reporter, Kevin Andrade. Obviously, a whole host of topics that we could get into when it comes to immigration here in Rhode Island, both looking to the past, the present, and future. And that's exactly what you'll hear on this episode today with Kevin Andrade, one of the newer hires, relatively newer hires over at the Providence Journal, focusing in on immigration news, really laying the groundwork for all of us to have a better understanding of who we are as Rhode Islanders. So, as always, a pleasure to spend some time together with you right here on the pod. New episodes every Tuesday and Friday, and a great way that you can support the pod is to subscribe, rate, and review on your favorite app. All right, if you're listening to this episode on release day, Friday, November 8th, coming up tonight at the Loft here in Providence, it's Elmwood Songwriters Club, presented by the Bartholomewtown Podcast. Now, Elmwood Songwriters Club is a free event. It features, this time, 8 Rhode Island-based artists performing 2 songs each with the order drawn at random, plus a guest speaker, and this time our guest speaker, Bartholomewtown Podcast future Hall of Famer, R.J. Heim of NBC 10. So tonight, Friday, November 8th, at the Loft in Providence, Rhode Island, it's Elmwood Songwriters Club, presented by the Bartholomewtown Podcast. For complete details, head over to Instagram at Bartholomewtown Podcast. For the address, message me, bill@ripodcast.com. Okay, let's get right to it. My conversation with the Providence Journal's Kevin Andrade. How did you kind of become a specialist with the Projo?
So it's actually rather funny. Maybe I should go all the way back to how I stumbled into journalism.
Bring it back. All the way. Here we go.
So I ended up going to grad school at the University of Arizona from 2010 to 2012, Master's Latin American Studies. Why? Because I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life after I graduated. My first job with the University of Arizona as a research assistant was working on this project that was focused on SB 1070, which, for your listeners, is the Arizona Show Me Your Papers law.
Joe Arapa, whatever his name is.
Arpaio. And it actually was a senator, a rather conservative senator from a district outside Maricopa County, whose name I cannot remember. But pretty much what I said was, if an officer in the state of Arizona suspected that a person was undocumented, they had the right to ask them for proof of residency.
Yep.
And that law was some years later struck down by the Supreme Court. So I was hired by the journalism department at the University of Arizona to just assess presentation at press outlets, namely the LA Times and New York Times, of how the Show Me Your Papers law was being presented to the public. Was it being presented with a pro-slant, an anti-slant? And I just got lost in this research project to a point where I even started at moments to forget about my actual work that I was supposed to be getting my degree in.
Nice.
And I started having this conversation with my boss, who would eventually become Master's Committee Chair, Dr. Celeste Gonzalez de Bustamante. Hi, Celeste, if you're listening. And so I just said, I want to be on the other side. And this is definitely a summation of what happened. But she said, oh, I have friends that can help. And also, Mexico's right there. You want to go over? And I'm like, yeah, sure. So that's how I ended up getting involved. I grew up in an immigrant family. My dad was born in Fall River. And my mom was born in a small village called Loivos near Chaves, which is in a northeastern region of Portugal called Trás-os-Montes, literally behind the mountains. And She came over in 1978, 4 years after she was a nurse and nun who participated in the revolution that overthrew the right-wing dictatorship in Portugal. So I grew up within the Portuguese community of Southern Mass and Eastern Rhode Island. I grew up in Bristol and I grew up in New Bedford, which are two very different worlds. I didn't realize it at the time, but in retrospect, like I had two extremely different experiences growing up, and yet they just coalesced into one. And I remember, and this still happens, like Christmas Eve, we'd go over to my tia Tina or tia Lydia's house, and we'd celebrate As Vésperas, and the main dish would be octopus. Octopus. And Christmas Day, I'd go to my godmother, my Aunt Gabe's house, and there would just be like this 6-course meal that looks like something out of Downton Abbey, which definitely harkens back to the 1950s, 60s Norman Rockwell ideal that was presented to large portions of the American public, specifically the Anglo-American public, during that time period which she grew up in. My first job out of school was with O Jornal, the Portuguese Journal, which focused on Portuguese-speaking communities between Boston and Providence, which was very revelatory for me because I was able to see the community that I grew up in from a very different perspective. I was no longer just interacting with people who were my parents' friends or my friends.
Right.
I was seeing like the actual social trends that undercut everything that we lived with. I ended up, after that, going to Yuma, Arizona, which is about 20 minutes away from the border, where I was an agriculture, military, border, education, and general reporter, and health reporter. And that one I got laid off from after 10 months. And then I said, maybe journalism isn't for me. So I went to the Dominican Republic for 2 years, where I taught English. And then I came back for personal reasons. And I found out in April of 2018 that Ramfis Trujillo, who is the grandson of Rafael Leonidas Trujillo Molina, was running for president of the Dominican Republic, and he was going to hold a rally here in Providence. And for those of you who don't know, Rafael Trujillo was a military dictator who took power in a coup in 1931 and was assassinated in 1961. And over the course of his reign in the Dominican Republic, often called the Plátano Curtain, the Plantain Curtain, about 50,000 people died on his orders. There was a genocide against Haitians. He was well known for having his lackeys go out and pick up girls who were generally minors for him to do unspeakable things with. And he was also known, him and his son actually were also known to have an electric chair where they would sit down, have meals, and watch interrogations. And this electric chair was calibrated to cause maximum pain without death. So this was not a good person. So I just called up the Projo and I said, this dictator's grandson is running for the Dominican Republic's presidency. He's holding a rally here. I've lived in the Dominican Republic. I'm familiar with Dominican history and culture. I speak Spanish, and I'm a journalist, so you should send me out to cover it. And they said yes. And after I wrote that story, I wrote 2 more, and then April 31st, 2018, I was full-time.
It was just like that, boom.
Yeah. I just showed up at the right time.
You and Madeline List are kind of like new-ish acquisitions to the Projo, and at a time when many people
Brian Amaral too.
And Brian Amaral, certainly, yes. And at a time when many people see the Projo as in decline, and in look, in a lot of ways, numbers-wise, it is, but at the same time, content-wise, the focus now being on specific areas. Did you feel like that kind of gave you your backstory, your understanding of history, right place, right time, everything you'd worked to kind of build as your self-identity? That all paid off in that moment because the Projo needed someone with those very specific skill sets. What about now, today? covering immigration in the Trump era, where it's become much more divisive of a topic, whereas before it was always sort of people had opinions, but now it's become almost people have opinions that aren't even related to the issue
I would
anymore.
agree with that statement. It definitely shows, and I can't speak for the other reporters, but I'm fairly certain that a crime reporter would not get questions regularly as, why are you even covering this? This isn't news.
Mm-hmm.
I get those comments fairly regularly from detractors. And I'm going to be honest, it is disheartening from time to time. And then I sit down and I actually look at my work, and I look at the relationships I've built over the course of my time at the Projo. I look at public response to my work, and there's always certain emails or voicemails that, when I'm really in that what am I doing mood, I'll turn to that and I'm like, that's what I'm doing. Probably the most important story I've written so far, they're all important, but this one definitely takes the cake, was the story of Sapor and San. This story was published online May 3rd. So I found out that around November-ish, that there was a huge uptick nationally in the deportations amongst Cambodians, 279% between fiscal years 17 and 18. And ICE is very proud of that. They're touting that as something to be proud of. And I started thinking there's a large Cambodian population centered around Providence and Cranston. And there's definitely a story there because the characteristics of the Cambodian community here are similar to a lot of other ones throughout the country. They left Cambodia in the 70s and 80s in the aftermath of the Vietnam War and the Khmer Rouge genocide, which is a genocide that was not based on race or ethnicity as opposed to social class. They killed 2 to 3 million people over the course of 4 years, and they started with the intellectuals and the government officials and anybody with money, and they cleared out the cities and sent them to the fields and said, we're going to start from year zero and create a brand new society. And over the course of the following 4 years, like I said, 2 to 3 million people died, and that was stopped by a Vietnamese invasion and occupation that ended in 1988. And Hun Sen, the current prime minister of Cambodia, has been prime minister since 88. He was also a high-level politician in the Democratic Republic of Kampuchea, which was the Vietnamese puppet state. But I digress. So there's a lot of trauma in that community. They come over here in the 70s and 80s. They're given very little social and financial support, and not to mention there's a massive language barrier. I don't know if you know this, Khmer is not a Romantic language. It is a Sinitic language. And it's, as a result, its writing system is not even the same alphabet, and its structures are extremely different. Even the sounds they make are from English, or even Spanish for that matter. And this created a sort of poverty trap, especially when you throw people who do not know the culture of this country into a economically impoverished area where government services are potentially non-existent or minimal, where police are known to be brutal towards the population. So a lot of them got involved in organized crime, and they did what they had to do, what from their perspective was what they had to do to survive. And as a result, a lot of them ended up committing aggravated felonies, which is a class of crime that was created in 1996. And it only applies to non-citizens in the U.S. If you commit an aggravated felony, it automatically flags you for deportation, eligible for deportation. And a lot of people end up doing this when they're 18 or 19. I wrote a story that was published in Friday's paper about a man, one of dozens picked up on Thursday by ICE for the next deportation flight to Cambodia. He was 20 when he got arrested and convicted of conspiracy to sell narcotics charges. He then, and he's 42 now, he's a chemical engineer, and he got detained on Thursday. He was called to check in. and he's still facing deportation, even though he's done his time, and he's clearly a contributing member of society at this point, 22 years later. Sapporn was 19 when he was a member of a gang, and he was arrested in Providence and pleaded guilty to having a handgun without a license. And overburdened public defender's offices play a large role in this as well. And pretty much my understanding, based on the family, was that the public defender said, take this, it's the best you're going to get, and move on once you're done with your prison term. However, because his sentence was longer than a year, aggravated felony. He was 19 when that happened, 2010. He was arrested again in 2015 for resisting arrest, and pleaded no to that. And then after he left the ACI for a 6-month stint, he was detained by ICE. Made a habeas petition and was released, and he came back to work. And mind you, he's still a documented resident. He's still a green card holder. He's eligible for deportation, but his green card is not expired. So he's able to work. He's able to have a life. And over the course of this time we're saying 2016 now, he meets a woman. They fall in love, and they move in together in August 2018. On September 12th or 13th, 2018, he goes in for a nice check-in, and they detain him. Early December 2018.
What is an ICE? Can you walk us through what an ICE check-in is here?
So
that just sounds so.
All right, so
bad,
Immigration and Customs Enforcement is ICE, and they have offices in most United States Citizenship and Immigration Services facilities, including the one in Warwick. And a lot of people who are green card holders, well, anybody with some form of documented residency who is not a citizen of the United States has to go in for regular check-ins. Generally, they're only for a year. And there are other things that could bring it up. However, if there are deportation proceedings out against you, ICE could ask you to come in more often. And they could say, say your next one's in July, they could say, well, come in January instead. And when people get that, it's generally not good news.
Yeah.
So really what it is on paper is going in and saying, what am I doing in the U.S.? How's life been since the last check-in? And on paper is they want to make sure you're a contributing member of society. And a lot of immigrant communities definitely do not feel like it's been like that recently. They definitely feel like they're used more as tools of fear. And ICE has gone silent with me. I'd say 98% of the times I ask for a comment from them, dead silence. Last time I got a comment was when Woodworth drove the truck into the protesters, and that was just to say we were not involved in that, which they were not. So that's the check-in. Early in mid-December, he gets deported to Phnom Penh. February 3rd, he goes out with some friends on a motorcycle. Another motorcycle hits it, and it throws him in front of a flatbed truck. And it runs over him, and he dies. That's deportation. On paper, it just affected Sapporn. But he has a mother. He has a little brother. He has a father who has health problems. He has a girlfriend who has 2 children. That money that he was bringing in was critical to all those people. Not to mention, he's a family member. I'm sure if somebody came in and took one of your loved ones in the middle of the night, you would be significantly disturbed by that as well. And this impacted not just them, the entire Cambodian community. I remember when I went in to interview his parents, I said, let's do it in one of the temples. And they agreed to that. And I told them, you can bring like a couple of people if you want, just to make sure, like, I know this is hard for you, so I want you to feel comfortable, and if you need it, you have that moral support. I go in, 200 people, are there to watch me do this interview. And that was like, at first it was like, oh, whoa, did not expect this at all. And then you like actually sit back and you have a moment to breathe, and it's just a moment that really, really symbolizes how critical and important an issue this is, not just to one person or people with immigration status issues. It's important to entire communities. Portuguese people went through a similar thing when the act was first passed back in the 90s, because it was retroactive. So people who committed crimes in the 70s also got flagged for deportation. So it's definitely in the Trump era become much more draconian. And that's not to say under the Obama era it was not. Obama, a lot of the immigration activists I speak with, they say that they talk about the George W. Bush years like they were the golden years. Though Obama was hard on immigration up through second election. Then after that, he eases up on it, which I don't think I really need to say much to really give an analysis on that. I think it speaks for itself. So these are issues that on paper look like they affect one person, but no, they affect entire communities. Growing up in one of these communities, I could tell you, one person gets deported, everybody knows about it within a week. Even if you've never met this person or his brother, sister, wife, or whatever in your life.
That is heavy stuff. So now the Providence Journal, people are going to knock it. People are going to say Prince dying, Prince this, whatever, put it up against the other paper in town. But if, no matter what, you're doing this work in there. So yes. It's important. It's essential.
I would agree with that statement.
Right there. And it needs to be preserved and also expanded, right? I mean, that's the only way forward.
Person.
You're only one person, right?
Yeah, and I would love to be able to cover every single story that's out there, but it's just not possible.
Yeah.
One thing that I think Rhode Island media really needs to think about and reflect on, they need to put a higher priority on these stories related to immigration. That story on Saporn, it went national and international. No other outlet followed up on it locally. And Rhode Island, 10% of the population is of Lusophone descent. That's Portuguese speaking. Being either, and I'm including Cape Verdean in that. Sure. And do you know how many reporters there are in the state who speak Portuguese for any outlet? Me.
I would guess, maybe one other, family member of, Vovo spoke it. Nothing.
No, there's nobody. I'm the only reporter in the whole state who speaks Portuguese.
Wow.
And that's depressing to me.
Muito bom.
Pois é, muito bom. And it's so funny because this is actually the first time I've ever been interviewed on the air in English. Spanish, Portuguese, I've had it, but this is the first time in English I've done it.
Fascinating. Yeah, what about the media outlets that are in, because I know there's the Portuguese radio station or maybe a
97.3.
And there's two. There's Mega and then
Mega is Spanish,
right? And public radio. So there's two Spanish-speaking stations.
Latino public radio doesn't exist anymore, but they're reinventing themselves right now. There's Poder 1110. There's Latina 100.3, which is more music, but they also have political programming. There's La Mega. And as far as Portuguese media is concerned, I'm aware of the Portuguese Times and Portuguese Channel, which cover Boston to Providence, as well as O Jornal, which is where I started, based out of Fall River, which also covers the same territory. There's, whenever you go to Apsara or Four Seasons, you see copies of Khmer America or Cambodian Times. There's America News. There's El Guatemalteco, Acontecer Latino for Spanish language print media. I believe Providence in Espanol is gone, but it's a vibrant community because a lot of these communities back home, that's where you got most of your news, was from the newspapers.
Right.
And I could tell you, when I lived in the Dominican Republic, people there were far more connected to their phones than they are here. But for news, they still generally went to the paper for that sort of, for what matters in their lives. And one of the benefits of being in print is that it enables you to go further into depth with your reporting. Every outlet, every medium has its specialty. TV has breaking news. That's it, and that's really where it shines. And NPR does in-depth reporting as well. But their local stories are what's the word I'm looking for? The basic facts of whatever it is that's happening. Yeah. And then you have greater stories that go out nationally that provide the context to all that,
right? Which
is 100% necessary. Paper is where you really get the chance to, and space to go in depth. And I still need to train myself to start saying digital more, because more and more we're starting to focus on our digital operation. It's because it's 2019.
Yeah.
It's 2019.
You gotta do it.
Yeah, you really don't have a choice anymore.
Where can people find you online? I know that you've got an active Twitter and Facebook going on.
So Facebook. So I have a Facebook group called RI Immigrant Communities News, which you can apply to join. And I accept 99.95% of the people who apply. And Twitter, I have @KevProjo. And Instagram @KGANDR.
As always, great to spend some time together here on the pod. Remember, I'll be back on Tuesday with a brand new episode. Have a great weekend, everybody. And until next time, I'm Bill Bartholomew. We'll talk soon.
At HealthSource RI for Employers, we provide access to health insurance to more than 1,100 local businesses and nonprofits, and 96% of them renew through us every year. Maybe it's our choice of 19 different health plans, our 10 years of customizing solutions, or our one local team of dedicated experts helping employers find quality health insurance. See how our numbers stack up for you. Learn more at healthsourceri.com/employers.